Drew, thanks for having me, mate. How you doing?
Doing well, man. Can't complain. It's Friday here in Chicago. It's getting a little warmer every day, so.
Oh yeah, you're right. I'm still getting used to I've still got to grapple with the whole southern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere stuff. So we're just sort of coming out of summer, and it's still pretty hot here. So I'm assuming you guys are just coming out of winter soon.
Yeah, we're getting into spring. Spring break in a couple weeks for us, so that's pretty sweet. And
Nice.
yeah, Mark's joining us from Australia, which is pretty awesome. But before we get going, I just want to check in on you. I know you're a big Kirk Hinrich guy. How's the grieving process? How's that going?
Look, I think I've moved on to the whole acceptance stage.
That's good.
It's been a week or two now, so I've sort of had my time to dwell on it and to move on, and it is what it is, sort of thing. So I've just embraced it now, and he's with the Hawks, and obviously the Bulls were out without Heinrich, and I could probably go on for quite a while about that particular trade, but yeah, it was obviously disappointing for me as a big Heinrich homer, but at the same time, it is what it is. It's time to move on.
I'm glad you're accepting it, man. That's a big step.
Yeah.
Love the tribute video, by the way. That was fantastic.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
It was good stuff.
Very
All right.
emotional.
Well, let's get into it. I always like to ask our guest, how did you become a Bulls fan? What really got it going for you? What made you interested?
Yeah, sure. So I guess you could define me as the ultimate bandwagoner fan. So here in Australia, growing up in the 90s sort of thing, being introduced to the sport of basketball, NBA really wasn't on TV that much. It was on like maybe once a week sort of thing on a Saturday or a Sunday morning. I don't recall 100% the exact time because I would have been about 7 or 8 years old, but the occasional game that you would see would be a Bulls game or an Orlando Magic game or a Houston Rockets game. One of those teams that was doing really well in the mid 90s, and of course the Bulls were the best team going around through the 90s, and because of Michael Jordan being a global icon, the Bulls and the game of basketball really expanded on the world stage. So I had just started playing basketball as a sport as a kid and didn't really follow the local league here, and it was basically as simple as walking into a shop and seeing the Bulls logo and buying a hat that had the Bulls logo on it. And I guess from that point on, I sort of just jumped on the bandwagon and became a Jordan fan, became a Bulls fan, even though I didn't really get to see it that much. But I suppose when I sort of matured a bit, and I guess the whole internet picking up steam and allowing global fans like myself to connect to the NBA and even the NFL or other sports like that, it just made it easier to be an international fan. So I would say, from a very simplistic point of view, Michael Jordan and the Bulls and just their gravity allowed me to jump onto the bandwagon. But it was probably, I want to say, the era thereafter where I became a fanatic, if you will. So yeah, those really dark days of when Michael left, and obviously when we were trying to rebuild, that's probably when I really got into the Bulls, and that's why I'm such a Kirk Hinrich homer, is because I guess the first team that I sort of lived and died by with each game was the era where the Bulls drafted Kirk Hinrich. So to me, him and John Paxson were the catalyst of turning this organization around back in the early 2000s. So I guess that's why I have that soft spot for
Kirk,
the
baby Bulls days. Love the baby Bulls.
Yeah, exactly. And you compare those teams to the disappointment of the Curry and Chandler and Crawford days. Seeing Kirk come through was a sort of a breath of fresh air, and then obviously followed by Gordon and Deng. So I guess that's my story of how I became a Bulls fan. I think it would be pretty typical of most global fans, if you will, that are my age. So yeah, I guess I am a bit of a bandwagoner in that sense, but I'm totally comfortable with that as well.
As long as you're comfortable with it, it's all that matters.
That's
so the Bulls currently sit at 30-30 on the season, and they're performing well below expectations. Yep. So when you look at this team right now, what is the biggest problem?
The biggest problem? So, I mean, there's a ton of problems with this team right now, but I think the biggest problem or the deep-seated issue here is definitely the roster. So if you just analyse the roster, you've got a lot of guys that are not just over 30, but they're almost in their mid-30s. So you look at Pau Gasol, who's still playing good basketball, but he's 35 years old. I think Dunleavy is either 34 or 35 himself. Kirk, we've traded him now, but he was 35. Aaron Brooks is, just ticked over 30. Joakim Noah and Taj Gibson as well will be heading towards their mid-30s pretty soon. So a lot of the rotation are older guys, and I guess when you get older, naturally your athleticism wanes, and the roster itself just is old, it's unathletic, and it just doesn't have a lot of pieces, I suppose, that fit with what Fred Hoiberg wants to do. And we've sort of had to revert back to what Tom Thibodeau was trying to do last season, which I guess isn't Fred's strength. It's not what he was brought here to do. It's not something he probably wanted to do. So he's learning on the fly in that sense. And just the whole combination of Fred trying to figure out how to handle a roster that doesn't fit his normal style with a roster that clearly is past its expiration date. I think that's the biggest problem here. There's just too many one-way players on this roster right now. When you go through the roster, Jimmy Butler's probably the only guy on the roster that can play both offense and defense, and you can credibly say he's really good on both. Maybe you can put Taj Gibson and Mike Dunleavy in the same boat as well, but again, they're role players. They're not going to impact the game at the level like a Derrick Rose or a Jimmy Butler can. So if you've got that many one-way players on the roster, you're going to have a lot of trouble finding combinations and lineups that can work for you to get to maximize both your offensive and defensive potential. So I think any issues that we sort of want to focus on in this chat or any others, I think the deep-seated issue here is definitely the roster, and the front office definitely backed this roster, and they've lost that bet.
Yeah, absolutely. So many problems for this team. We could just go down the list. Lack of depth at the point guard position, horrible defense, goes on and on and on and on and on. So, that being said, do the Bulls make the postseason?
Look, I think right now it's up in the air. So Jimmy Butler's scheduled to come back against the Rockets potentially. So if that were to occur and he doesn't sustain any further injuries, then Butler alone can will this team to the playoffs, maybe as a 7th or an 8th seed. But even then, I would say it's probably a 50-50 call right now as to whether the team makes the postseason or not. They look to be, at times at least, they look to be giving up pretty quickly. I don't know if that's just the guys that sort of Fred's left with at the moment, with so many being out, or whether it's just the team just giving up on the season basically. So it'll be interesting to see how things sort of proceed over the next 22 games. But I think right now it's a line ball call as to whether they make the postseason, and if they do make the playoffs, I don't think they're going to do anything of note. Depending on matchups and obviously health, then possibly they could do something like a second round berth against a particular team if they can get a favourable matchup in round one. But the funny thing is, if the Bulls find themselves in the 8th seed, they've got Cleveland in round one, and I don't think anyone would be tipping the Bulls in that scenario. So ideally, the Bulls need to get into that 7th seed and face the Toronto Raptors, who I think we're 3-0 against this season. So that matchup, I think, could be favourable for the Bulls, even though the Raptors, have been much better than the Bulls this season. I think in the postseason matchups are hugely important, and for whatever reason, the Bulls just seem to have the Raptors' number. So if the Bulls want to make the playoffs, I think they need to get to that 7th seed. Otherwise, if they find themselves in that 8th seed, then I think it's going to be a pretty quick out against the Cavaliers.
Yeah, I think they can make their way up to that 7th seed, but like you said, I don't think they have it mentally. I don't think they're mentally tough enough to advance in the postseason to kind of battle it out through a first-round matchup, especially if you're playing a hungry team like Toronto or a young Boston team who has proven this season that they want to prove people wrong. They have a great coach, and we are 3-0 against Toronto this season. We match up with them pretty well, but like you mentioned, if we get that 8th spot and we go up against Cleveland, I don't think there's any way that we advance. And also a team like Atlanta scares me a bit with their athletic bigs. athletic bigs seem to give the Bulls a little bit of trouble just because Powell can't stay in front of any of them. And yeah, so we'll see what happens. I think they'll jump into the postseason, but it's a little too close for comfort right now.
So let me ask you a question. Who do you think in a first round matchup the Bulls could comfortably, well maybe not comfortably, but at least really challenge to get past? So you got Boston as your third seed, the Heat are in the fourth seed, and then Atlanta in fifth, and then of course you got Charlotte in sixth spot, who have really tailed up the Bulls at times this season. So depending on matchups, who do you think they could potentially get past here?
That's tough because I don't see them getting above that sixth spot. So you're going to play someone in the top three.
Yep.
I guess Toronto, even though they have a lot more talent than Boston, just because Boston just plays so well together, and I think in the postseason that's extremely important. You're not going to get past Cleveland. So I'd probably say Toronto. I think they'd give them the best challenge and give them the best opportunity to move forward. But it's going to be tough either way, man. Yeah,
no, definitely. I probably agree with that. Boston scare me a little, which is a bit strange to say, given that they don't really have a star on their roster, but they're so deep, and like you said, they just play so together, and their defense is really solid. And our best two players are Jimmy Butler and Derrick Rose, and with the amount of guards and wings that they can throw on us defensively, I think that could really pose a problem. So Boston are a little scary to me, but I think Toronto, as you said, would definitely be the team. But even then, they currently have a 40 and 19 record, which is pretty damn good. So it wouldn't be a cakewalk, even though we have had a pretty favourable results against the Raptors this season. So I guess that's why I'm sort of leaning towards the Bulls not really doing anything of significance in the playoffs this year.
Yeah. So, what is your take on Fred Hoiberg so far? How would you evaluate them at this point through the season? Obviously, been a tough go for him so far. What do you think?
Yeah, look, it's been super hard for Fred, and because of that, I think there's been so many variables at play here that it's almost hard to gauge a really good read on Fred Hoiberg. The front office haven't done him any favours at all. So he's come in, and his predecessor, which is obviously Tom Thibodeau, was a terrific coach, and obviously things soured at the end with Tom Thibodeau, and a lot of fans as well had sort of turned on Tom and were ready to see him leave. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge how great he was at the same time. So just coming in, Fred was always going to be compared against a really, really good coach. So not living up to those, I suppose, lofty standards that Thibodeau had set, he was always going to cop some negative heat from the fan base. But then, when you factor in those roster issues that I talked about before, that the front office sort of left him with, things just haven't gone really well for a rookie head coach. And anytime you step into a coaching role, whether you've done it whether you've been an assistant in the NBA or whether you've come from college or whatever it is, it's obviously a completely different role. So there's always going to be some learning on the job, and trying to do that with a team that has, championship aspirations, no matter how false they are, the scrutiny was always going to be pretty high on Fred Hoiberg. And so that I guess that's why I think it's really hard to judge how good or bad he's been. But I suppose I sit in the middle of this right now. I would say he's probably an average. So if I was giving him a grade type thing, I'd probably give him a C, which I think is fair at this point. There's definitely been some things from him that I've liked, and certainly some things that I haven't liked. So if we just think about the things that we didn't like about Tom Thibodeau, I think Fred's done some things that Tom would never do that I think fans do appreciate. So Fred obviously is more than willing to mix up his rotations. He's willing to mix up the starting lineup, and those are things that Tom really struggled with, or at least didn't want to do. And he had his reasons for doing so, but I think that has been a breath of fresh air, even if some of those matchups haven't been, or some of those rotations haven't been great. He's at least willing to throw things around, and I think you got to appreciate that. But at the same time, some of the things that Tom did that we didn't like playing Gasol in the entire first quarter, or playing Jimmy Butler a huge amount of minutes, those sort of things have still continued into the Hoiberg era. So